New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Edge Live, conversations that awaken the heart and conversations that dive deeply into the lives of those that are doing good work in the world, that are channeling their time, talent, energy, resources, their love, their creativity into doing really wonderful things and bringing people together. So I'm so glad that you're here. And today I have a beautiful, wonderful friend of mine. She's a woman whose her life work embodies the very essence of sacred service, community, and transformation. My guest is Sylvia Nibley. She is a visionary and community catalyst who has spent decades weaving together the threads of personal awakening and collective healing. She's the founder of Inquiry Cards, a beautiful tool for inner reflection and wisdom, and the guiding force behind the Warm Springs Alliance, which is a nonprofit we'll get to talk about. And Sylvia, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you, Allie. So good to be with you.
Yeah, it's really good to be with you. We're both here at the top of Utah, and you're in Salt Lake, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's hear a little bit about you. Let's talk a little bit about how we met and how your life got started. Where did you grow up and all of that?
Yeah, so I'm one of those humans who found their way into things that the high school counselor never would have told them was possible. I was just doing intuitive readings at a fancy fundraiser in Park City yesterday and thinking, this is a really interesting path, you know? I did not know that I could just be myself and do all of the things that Spirit has guided me to do. So yeah, I grew up in central Utah, left there quickly, left the fundamentalist religion that I grew up in and just kept trusting what felt right to do next. You know, not without challenge, right? Leaving a culture and a conditioning is an ongoing process that still continues.
Yeah, I can imagine. I did not grow up in this area. I grew up in England and moved to Utah 22 years ago. I can't believe it. It's gone by very quickly. Yeah, when we grow up with a particular culture, and Utah is predominantly Mormon or LDS, and I can imagine that can, and still being here in this culture, you probably have family and friends. It must be an interesting journey.
Yes, and as everyone's journey, you know, we get the opportunities to learn who we are and be who we are, and sometimes that aligns with what we grew up with, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So for me, it didn't, and it took, you know, my first 25 years to start having those inklings of, I don't think this is for me, you know, growing up in a small rural Utah town and never feeling like I fit in, but then reflecting back on it, realizing that was a really good thing for me, because the truth was I didn't fit in. And as painful as that was at the time, it's led me to find where I do fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were young and you were walking your own spiritual path in conjunction with your family and everyone around you, what were the things that, because I, at a very young age, had a oneness experience at age 5 that really impacted me.
Mm.
And although I wasn't part of I grew up in Church of England,
Mm.
which, and my family was not religious at all, but back in those days, there was sort of a blending of certain elements of religion in the schools. And so I always had felt like, because of my experience of oneness at age 5, that I didn't fit either.
Mm.
Not necessarily with the religion, but with people in general, that
Mhm.
somehow I didn't really understand them and
Mhm.
what they were talking about in terms of their religious experiences
Mhm.
and mine, which seemed to be very uncommon. And so I was just very quiet. I didn't ever talk about it.
Yeah.
That connection with the divine has always fueled me and sourced me, no matter where I am in a church or not a church or a spiritual conversation. It has always felt very personal to me. And
Mhm.
so I'm imagining for you, there must have been some of that going on. Yes, there was your cultural norms, but it sounds like there's been something within you since very early on that felt very connected to something more than yourself.
Yeah, thank you for saying all that, Ellie. That helps me actually reflect differently on my experience. I'm so glad you had that oneness experience. I didn't have something like that until, oh gosh, way into my 30s. That really was, I think, the activation of the knowing of oneness and connection to all things. So I would say, as a child, being in a place where I was deeply depressed, high social anxiety, actually high anxiety of all sorts, all sorts of physical trouble, irritable bowel syndrome that was undiagnosed and I didn't know what it was, asthma, all of these things that I was sickly, I was not thriving, I felt incredibly lonely. And like, as I listen to you, it makes me realize, where my connection came in was through nature,
Mm.
not in an easy way, not in the beauty, it was like, no, it was more like survival.
Mm.
I say, and I say this with gratitude to my parents for what they did do and what they could do. But also I didn't feel, safe or loved or held or some of those primary things because of, their wounds. So I was in that place of, emotional abuse and just deep, deep fear and disconnection. So the survival connection to me was nature. And I just, sometimes I say I was raised by a lilac bush because that was my refuge. I would climb inside this giant bush that was big enough for me to crawl inside of. And that was like the primary safety and connection.
Wow, that's I've never had a conversation quite like this. I too am very connected to nature, and growing up in the English countryside and not having siblings until much later on, 8, 9 years, I was 8 or 9 when my sister was born. I too felt very held and connected to nature. Um, and still to this day, I
Mhm.
find a great deal of comfort from being outdoors. And I paint, that's what I paint, is a lot of florals and a lot
Mm.
of nature. And
Yeah.
so I think those early experiences we had, even in the midst of fear and pain and struggle,
Yeah.
can give an element of belonging.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you had the countryside. Yeah, we had kind of a desolate, it's Sanpete County in Utah, if anybody knows where that is. And it is desert, and like our yard was just hard clay soil, and weeds and grasshoppers that I was terrified of. And so it wasn't that kind of again, that lush. And but what I found was like that's what I needed. And so even just pictures in a book of a sylvan forest, which is what my name means, was kind of my lifeline. Just that feeling of green or water. And so much of my life is focused around that now, is the connection and finding spirit in the trees and the earth. And we'll talk more about my nonprofit around that. But yeah, it's like children are resilient, amazingly resilient. And I also work with people in my healing practice that I've been at for decades, with a lot of folks with a lot of trauma, and find just how amazingly resilient humans can be in finding things that keep us going, whatever that is. And like you say, it's deeply personal. Our spiritual connection, I think, is the most personal thing we can possibly experience. How do you connect with, the source, whatever that is for you?
Yeah. I love that we're having this conversation. It's helping me to clarify my thoughts around how personal it is. And when I contrast that to sort of organized spirituality, which I'm a part of myself, but there's always been this, it's almost like a both and. I have this very personal connection and way that I view the world that doesn't fit into a box.
Yeah.
And many of the constructs that we're exposed to in our cultures have us sort of try and fit into something, and to it's as I this isn't like the first time I've thought this, but I'm just seeing with new eyes the absurdity of a matriarch or a patriarch or of some sort trying to instruct everyone how to do their religion or their connection or their yoking to the divine. Seems a little prehistoric or something. Because it is so individual.
Yeah. I remember, I guess we could call it an awakening experience, probably in my early 20s, where it just dawned on me, how that happens, that the religion that I came from someone else's spiritual experience.
Yeah.
They had this wow revelation, right? And I realized, that was their thing. That was their path. That was their life. That was their, aha. And then I looked at the major religions of the world and tracked back to, same thing. These are someone else's experiences. That doesn't mean that I follow their recipe. That means that I find mine. And that really changed everything for me.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. So you have some experiences in your 20s that led you down your path. What does that look like and feel like?
Yeah, I guess some of the first ones, I have to give my sister a lot of credit because she really led the way. We're very much alike, born just 3 years apart. We weren't close as children, but in our 20s, we started to connect more as adults. And she was thinking for herself.
Wow.
And that was something I hadn't really seen before. And I was fascinated by it. I was like, how do you do that? Because it was just like, my conditioning was so much in that box. And, don't question. And this is just the way it is. And just follow it. And then you'll be happy. And then, you'll go to the highest part of heaven and all that kind of stuff. And it's like when you're conditioned that way as a child, that just, you don't think about anything else. That's just the way it is. But here she was questioning things and coming up with different answers. And And so I really was inspired by that. And I think that's what led to this experience of, no, wait a second. And I've continued to do that. In fact, I will share one of the tools I've created to help people do just that, think for themselves. So yeah, it was just like one thing led to another. And I found that I was feeling more spacious and I was getting less sick. It's like in my 20s, I had chronic fatigue and, these things that felt mysterious. And so, yeah, just a step at a time. Sometimes we have those larger openings, and sometimes it's just kind of the grind of day to day finding what is that impulse, and I reflect back to when I was about 12, I felt just this seed of, if I could just be of service, if I could just help somebody have a healing moment, just one person, like that would give me a sense of satisfaction. What I didn't know then was that was the first inklings of my path as a healing practitioner. Just this, I started reading books on acupressure and herbs, at 12, but thinking, no, that's just more to even, I couldn't possibly hope for, actually making a difference in that way. So it was in my 20s again that I just felt like, okay, I'm not satisfied with my career direction. And so what's possible? And again, just feeling really, really scared and tight around, I don't know. And maybe I could go to massage school, but again, it felt like too much to hope for. So with some help from a friend, I was terrified to even open the envelope with the catalog to massage school, right? Just can also be an indicator of that you're on path, when something means that much to you. And I didn't know that at the time, but I coach people and that kind of thing all the time now, right? It's like, how do you recognize these inklings and these impulses? So yeah, and finally went to massage school, and then that really set my direction that I've had no question of ever since.
Did that journey help you heal your own things going on with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's what always happens with our path. I think it leads us into our own healing, and especially for those of us who feel led into the path of having a healing influence. And, that can be as a one-on-one healing practitioner, that might be as an artist, or, there are so many ways that can take shape. But yeah, for me, it was trusting that I could do that. And then when you're doing healing work with others, it really accelerates your own healing path. If you're going to stay with it, and that really is your path, you're just going to be doing your work in a deep way constantly.
So as you've navigated and created your own healing, and maybe there were outside influences, you can tell me in a minute, but as you've done that, and you've grown, evolved spiritually, and in all the other ways that we do naturally, how have you and now you're coaching and supporting others, what are the fundamentals, would you say, to self-healing and being open to call upon others to come in and support you as you do on your path? What do people need to know, do you think, about, if they're in a place where they have a diagnosis, or they're struggling emotionally, mentally? What are some of the things that are helpful to know about self-healing?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it always comes to the challenges that life brings us. Like you say, sometimes an illness or a death, or, these things that catalyze change in our lives. And, some of the fundamentals are, I think what comes to me first is courage. Just that willingness to face into the difficult, and trusting ourselves. I think listening to yourself, self-inquiry is such an incredible tool to keep coming back and coming back. I think there is nothing as rare as a thought of your own. There's nothing as rare as an act of your own. And that's what leads you to satisfaction and happiness. And, it's not the if and when you have something outside yourself, then you're going to be happy. It's always an inside job. So getting support around that, trusting those small steps, moment to moment of, reaching for what feels like the safe thing, what feels like the supportive thing. And then they say safe relatively, because it's always a stretch. It's like we create safety through grit and courage and keep going.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the major influences for you as you started healing and releasing some of these conditions that had caused you, so much trouble? Was it once you got into the massage school?
Yeah, that was the biggest opening there. And I'd come from a background where I was just really touch starved. I think that was at the root of a lot of the physical issues, was that I just needed to be held. That's such a basic need. So massage school was really pivotal in that way. So a lot of body work, and I continue that. I'm 35 years in.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that, along with, I would say, spirituality, schools of thought that were completely different for me. Taoism, like reading the Tao Te Ching in my 20s was just rocked my world. Helped me see things differently, helped me feel into things that felt truer. And that resonated in a different way. And my path over these decades has led me to understand that I'm a mystic. I'm one of those humans who's on the direct path, which I just describe that as I'm connected and resonate with many schools of thought, but I don't ascribe to anyone in particular. And I know that works for other people, and I don't have judgment about people who find what feels true for them in an organized system or structure. But for me, I just live in the mystery. I live in, I don't know, a lot of the time. And that's just led me to trust this resonance. I'd say Joseph Campbell was also a really deep influence for me, where he was looking at the different religions in the world and finding the common threads between them. And then I sensed, oh, that's true. It's the commonality, the universality, the oneness that's true.
Yeah, we're getting thumbs up. You're getting thumbs up, Sylvia. You're striking a chord.
Whoever's out there listening. Well, and if for those people giving a thumbs up, I think there's a lot of us. And one of the things about American culture is, well, or maybe not just American culture, maybe it goes way, way back and probably does, but we get taught that we should lock in on one thing. That if we don't, we're dabbling, we're not serious. It's like, no, you're supposed to do that one thing and keep going with it always. Pick one. If it's Buddhism, just be that. If it's Christianity, just be that. And I just work with so many people all the time who that doesn't fit. And maybe that's also a kind of sign of the shifting in consciousness, kind of as humanity, that there are a lot of us saying, I feel a yes for this piece, and I feel a yes for that piece. And it's personal, and it's my direct connection. And so I just say that because I think a lot of times we need to just have that sense of validation and permission to follow what feels right moment to moment, even if that means we don't pick one thing.
Mm-hmm. You use the term mystic, and I'm wondering how, because I'm sure there's people listening that are intrigued by that. Like we know that there's books that have been written by mystics, and there's people that have this deeper sort of sense of presence.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about, because that's a brave thing to say, and I see that and hear that and honor that. So can you speak to that courage to use that term and talk to how that shows up in your everyday experience?
Sure. I think of it is brave because we still carry that trauma of hundreds and thousands of years of people like this being persecuted and murdered, really. I think the collective memory around that is still quite strong. So for myself, that looks like trusting my inner voices. As I've found my own expression and truth of my own spirituality, I resonate with the mystics. That was part of the aha. Oh yeah, Rumi, Hildegard von Bingen. It's like these people that were in connection with the divine fire, right? And that's my experience. I do directly feel that, and sometimes it's very, very intense, right? Sometimes it's like voltage in my body that just, it's like 220. Mm-hmm. And so just those kinds of kind of signals that, okay, this is a particular path, and this is what I'm curious about. This is how I live, is tuning in to my direct connection, and that's what I do now as a healing practitioner, as I do intuitive reading. So I hold that space, for other people, where I'm listening to spirit and sharing what I get by that. So we could call that channeling. We could call that, I do mediumship, and it feels to me like I'm one of those people who is just made to be a universal communicator. Mm-hmm. With all things, right? Living in that connection with oneness in the way that feels true for me. And it also, it feels like no big deal. It's like a lot of people sort of expect, the fireworks, which happens sometimes, but it also can just feel like the most natural, normal, of course. Had an experience a few days ago with some ants that invaded my home, and I had a communication with them and asked them what was going on. And we had a little chat and we came to an understanding, like, I can't have you in my cupboards, and I really don't want to murder you. So we came to an agreement, and I said, how I talked to the queen, and it's like, what do you need in order to move safely? Because I really want to support you living in a place that's good for you. And I got 2 to 3 days, and I got, impressions about how to do that and invite them to another place. And I did that. And by the 3rd day, they were gone. They were completely gone. And, I've doubted things like that before, but it was just such a true connection with the consciousness of the ant colony, where it's like, you tell people about that, they might think that's kind of strange. And then I realize, no, actually what's strange is that we don't do that. We don't commune with the trees and the land and the food we eat, and we can, and everybody can in their own way. Yeah,
those senses have become we're numb to those senses in many cases because we just haven't used them.
Yeah. And a lot of people feel broken around that, just because they've had to close down those more intuitive gifts.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are right at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Sylvia, and we're going to dive into some of the great things that she uses and does to connect with people and bring that beauty and light into their lives too. We'll see you in a minute.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center, Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
We are back. Welcome back. So, Sylvia, I would love to dive into explore some of the ways that you work with people, the things you've created, and the communities you bring together. I know you're very involved with dance. And so there's so many things as I've been doing a little research on you, and I know you. You've come and shared at the Om Fest that we had up here in Ogden years ago. And so I know how impacting you are on the local community, but it extends far from just local. So let's talk about some of the great things that you do with the work that you do and with your sort of this mystic and your expanded consciousness energy. So
Oh, thank you, Allie. Yeah, I think the common thread with these things would be probably practices and tools that really come through the divine feminine. It's oftentimes the things that I've created come from that need to have more opportunities that feel resonant with the feminine, like dance. It's like that's one of my primary practices, is just movement, spontaneous. The body knows what it needs. So I founded the Women's Full Moon Dance 22 years ago, and we're still going. And it's just a safe place for women to move and express and find that sense of truth and expression in their bodies, and create safety in that, and connect the body and the spirit, which is, I think, where a lot of the suffering comes from, is that split between spirit and body and mind. And that goes way back thousands and thousands of years to the original sin story, that the women were the weak ones, right? And there's a lot that stems from that. So movement and sound is another very primary and powerful tool. Meditation, so just these simple things, but we can create spaces and opportunities to practice them. I host a monthly community healing circle where everybody can give, everybody can receive. It's so simple. And another way that has taken shape is a tool called inquiry cards. That was another, a vision that came through fully formed. It's like we need to practice self-inquiry, because better questions can open space and again lead us to that experience of a true thought, a new thought that is our own, a new act that is our own. So they came through as just a fully formed vision. Didn't have any idea how to actually create them. It was 18 years before they got into the world. I'll just hold them up for the camera here. So,
oh yeah, those are very familiar. I have a couple of decks of your inquiry cards.
Yeah. So the shape is important. We got the sacred geometry of the hexagon going here. We've got nature images. I'll just hold up some. They're all nature images, and sometimes you can guess what they are, and sometimes you can't. So you're looking at the world from a different perspective, and the questions open up space in really powerful ways. Again, simple. When you're chewing on something and going around and around, we tend to loop on our thoughts, don't we?
Yeah. So tell us about where this, you said it was sort of downloaded, this idea of the inquiry cards came fully orbed. Tell us about that. What were you doing when this dropped in?
I didn't know at the time that I'm a visionary, a mystic visionary. So, when this, I don't remember the exact moment that one came in, but it just did. I saw them, I felt them, I knew what they were for. And it was kind of intense and disorienting to have something like that. It's not there, and then here it comes out of the blue. So I just did my best to take notes and make a little prototype and just start being a student of questions, being a student of self-inquiry. So I don't know how it works. It just happens. I know now that I don't need to be at the effect of it necessarily, because sometimes when these visions come in, it's like I couldn't sleep. I couldn't, it's just take notes, and it's just like this kind of lightning bolt feeling, and it can kind of fry the nervous system. But I've learned how to navigate that a little more now, although I'm still working with these visions that have dropped in. So yeah, does that answer your question, Allie?
Yeah, I think so. So you made so all of this started like pouring into your awareness, and you said you created a prototype. And so what happened from there? Because I'm sure other people have, big ideas and visions, and they probably would appreciate to know like how you manifested it. I listen to the kids these days, and they're so big on manifesting, and so it's I'd love to sort of tie that with the vision. Like, yeah, you can have a good idea or a big idea or a mystical moment, but how does it, when the rubber meets the road, so to speak, how can, because I know you are also a very practical woman that understands technology and marketing, and you understand a lot of how the real world works. So combining these two, parts of you, these dimensions of you, the mystic with the practical. Tell us how this idea actually came into manifestation.
Yeah, I love that question, Allie. And my answer to it is going to be different than anybody else's. But I will share with a real intent that anybody who has these ideas that come through, that what I say is useful to you. And for me, again, it's always an inside job. I can't even count the number of people who have said, I have had an idea for a deck. Who was your printer?
Right? I've said that.
I'm like, oh, it's so much more than that. Yeah, get them printed. Sure, that's great. But for me, what it really has come down to is my own transformation, because as a visionary and also someone with a lot of wounding and trauma, like I was not grounded. I was a bliss ninny. I was like, I was going up and out for everything. I was dissociating because it was too scary to be in my body, which makes it very difficult to manifest things into this world. So, it's been a process of decades of healing my own, wounds and coming into that place where I can actually get things into this world. And that was my prayer for decades. How do I do this? How do I get, these are big ideas, these are things that can serve millions of people. And I did tend to focus on the how, which is usually not what actually needs to happen. So yeah, I mean, for me, it was gestating for a long time with that idea, and just saying yes, I'm willing to be the person that this idea comes through. And Elizabeth Gilbert talks a lot about this, and I love how she communicates how the creative process works, and it's different for everybody, but you learn how to be in relationship with your ideas. And I have a whole bunch of them on the back burner. They're like gestating. I have said yes to them. I've done a lot of work around them. I've done the research. I've done the outlining. But my personal bandwidth has not allowed me to create all of them yet. And I'm learning that who you get support from is critical. It's not just me getting these things born into the world. It's who else can help with these things. I'm still learning on all of that. But yeah, it's not a direct line from A to B, as nothing is.
I'm really hearing you. Yeah, it sounds like my question sounded so simplistic. Well, how do you manifest it? And what I'm hearing you say is it's consciousness. It's doing your own healing work.
Yeah.
It's coming into alignment with the natural order and flow. You talk of the Tao, I think of the the way, the Wu way.
Yeah.
When there's things have coalesced, it's gestated, and now there's something that's born. Everything's born in divine right timing.
Yeah. And it's also true. It's a paradox. It also is our action. It is our inspired action. It is our healing process. And as you make that thing, it makes you. And then that's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would love to share with whoever's with us now or in the future listening here, the power of questions.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump into some inquiry.
Yeah. So these are, again, they're all nature images. We got the question mark here. And really the whole experience is pointing you back to yourself, because that's the answers really are inside you. And that's, again, where our conditioning has taught us otherwise, to look outside of ourselves for answers, for money, for power, for love, all of that stuff we tend to focus on as the default in the external world. And so these are a simple tool to help us practice coming back to ourselves and having the experience of a question. So I'm going to pose a question to everyone. But before I do that, what I invite you to do is just bring to mind something that's been on your mind or your heart that you've just been chewing on or brewing on. We're humans. We are here to grow, so there's usually something. Yeah. And those things tend to be around the same topics for all of us humans, relationships, health, life purpose, money, safety, relationship. It's just, these are the themes of how we evolve. So whatever that is for you, I invite you to just hold that in your awareness. And then I'm going to ask you a question. And I invite you to direct the question to that topic. Okay, so I'm going to hold this up for the camera. What if I were more powerful? What if I were more powerful in relation to that thing? And here's where we do something different. We pause. American culture is not so great at pausing. But we're going to do that right now. And so I invite you to just take some deep breaths with that question. What if I were more powerful? And just notice what comes to you. It's in the quiet. It's arising from the silence that the truth can come to you. It's already there. Yeah. Do you want to share anything that you got, Allie?
Yes, I do. That was really powerful. No, my question when you asked us what topic or what question, or I immediately went to relationship. I went to my family. And my question is, how can I show up more in more useful, more impacting ways for my daughter, my granddaughters, and everyone else, but specifically the women in my life. And so when your card said, what was it?
What if
I was more powerful?
Yeah.
That was a shocker. I mean, it wasn't that much of a shocker, but it was in relationship to this question, because I have a particular way about me that I think is good, but it has a shadow side, and that's being too passive, being too go with the flow, being someone that doesn't want to exert my power, because I don't like to paint seagulls in other people's pictures, so to speak. I like everyone to do themselves. And so I think this stems from maybe growing up in England, where you don't tell people how to be or how to act, and my own wounding from a child, having parents that weren't there. I didn't have a domineering person in my life, and so I never really learned the art of being powerful, because it felt more it was a self-preservation tactic to be more mindful of everyone else's wants and needs,
right.
And to not be that big light. But in this instance, I'm hearing my own higher self say, what if you were more powerful here? You've got a lot to share. And you're biting your tongue, or people pleasing, or having fear of that might be actually getting in the way of you showing up in a more useful, impacting way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is such an important conversation right now, because I think all of us as humanity and globally, we're really working with this question of what is power. Right? And so much of our conditioning teaches us that we are powerless, or that we should be powerless, that we should trust power and authority outside of ourselves. So I think this is a question we could be asking maybe for the next 5-10 years.
Yeah.
And to get used to asking that question and directing it in different places, right? So the what if is a really important part of that sentence. Because then we get to wonder into, what if I was more powerful? What would that look like? What would that feel like? I think especially, it's important for everybody, but especially women, because of the dynamics of what we've been taught around that. I really invite everybody to work with that question. I'll share one way that I'm working with this question of power. I mean, we could even ask, what is power? And I've decided that the way it's used most commonly is to mean political power. And I would say that's only one fraction of what power actually is. So we have political power, we have financial power, we have personal power, we have emotional power, we have mental power. And so I've decided that my personal policy now is to qualify the word power whenever I use it.
Mm.
Because what we hear on the news is, the most powerful person in the world. And I think that's worth questioning, right? What if you are as powerful as anybody that we label as powerful? And I think that's really important right now. So, we have the power within.
Mm.
And what does that mean? And how can we cultivate that?
Mm.
So,
yeah. And the power of our love, I think of that.
yes.
I think it was the Bob Marley that said, when the power of love overcomes the love of power,
Yes.
dot, 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 dot.
Yeah.
And as I sit with that, I think we do get numb to our own power, and we do look to the outside world to direct us.
Yeah.
When if we were more self-directed, like you said, it begins within. When we're holding our own power, the power of our love, for instance, or the power of our creativity, or the power of our word, or whatever we want to land on there, and then start to explore that, which your cards do so powerfully, is to take these questions inside, to consider our own depth, our own strength, our own abilities, to have a greater influence in not only our own lives, but in those of the people in our homes,
Yeah.
the people we work with.
Very much, very much. And here we are at this time where there are so many things to question. And it's like what we really can be questioning is the whole paradigm. Because the paradigm we've been living in that has caused so much suffering and is now causing a lot more death, and has always done that. We have used power in the paradigm of power over. And I so love what the previous Pope said. He said, where we got it wrong was dominion. Right now, that goes way, way back, into the Bible. It's like humans have a dominion over nature. And that's where I think the real separation happens. So to look at power and say, am I coming from that place of the hierarchy, the power over, the control is that type of power? Or am I looking at the power with others, the power with nature, the power with myself? That's a very different paradigm. So questioning all of that. And I would just really invite everyone to use this question as a practice. What if I were more powerful with my own health? What if I were more powerful with my voice? What if I were more powerful in my relationships, right?
Yeah.
And I think that can lead us to its empowerment, which is what's happening right now.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your cards. They really are beautiful and have been a staple in my spiritual practice. And I know that people can use these in any area of life.
Yeah. So inquirycards.com, you can pick a card there anytime. Yeah, and play with questions. Are in self-inquiry is really some of the most powerful tools we have.
So we're close to the end of our show, and I would love to talk a little bit about some of the things you're working on in this area, Warm Springs. Would you like to share a little bit about how that
Thank you.
came on board with for you?
Yeah, this was another one of those visions that came in like lightning, probably 25 years ago. And the vision is about a place here in the Salt Lake Valley. So there is a hot spring, but more than the water coming up out of the ground, which is beautiful and sacred, it hasn't been utilized for about 50 years. It's also an indigenous site. So it's a sacred site. Has been a healing and gathering place for probably thousands of years. And in this modern world has not been taken care of and utilized for its purpose, which is bringing us together in healing. So this nonprofit that I founded, the Warm Springs Alliance.org, if you want to check out more. Yeah, we're working to reactivate this place and reopen it as a place where we can get together and do the important healing work that needs to happen individually and collectively.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So before we leave, I know that we want to share your site, inquirycards.com, and so people can see that. And
yeah, you bet. Keep pulling questions for various reasons. Oh yes, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
there
exactly.
You go. For those of you that
Yeah.
are watching, you can see that.
Yeah, somebody wants to click on a card, it'll show you something comes up there. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So this podcast is called Growing Edge Live, and I'd love it for you to share what's at your growing edge right now. You've talked a lot about power and understanding our own power.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience here at the Growing Edge?
Thank you. Yeah, I love that name, Growing Edge. We are always on it, whether we know it or not, whether we go willingly or not, right? Yeah. Yeah, my growing edge right now is around the shift in my life where I just turned 60. So, I'm looking at questions of how do I want to embrace this next chapter, go deeper with holding space for my own health and my own healing, because the visions that I'm working with are pretty large scale. But who can help? That's one of the cards in the deck. If you pick, who can help, it's a really big question, because I've kind of gone as far as I can with just mostly me, But yeah, some really amazing breakthroughs are happening around that. But yeah, just different questions, different learnings, and doing my best every day to show up in the world in a way that makes a difference. I see there's so much need and there's so much heartbreak and suffering, and my work is the same always. So how do I show up to my work having a healing influence, being of service? And boy, does that keep stretching us. I know Allie.
Yeah, it does. Well, Sylvia, thank you so much for being my guest today here at Growing Edge. Yeah. I've so enjoyed our conversation. You've given me a lot to think about. And I love that you share how important it is to pause and to listen.
Yeah.
And that's something I think all of us will take away today, asking questions, growing discernment, and taking time to really listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think really the truth is we are more powerful. Yeah. We really are.
All right, everyone. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see you next week here at The Growing Edge. Bye.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth, to live a conscious life, on the growing edge.